Okay guys, thank you so much for coming. So today we're going to talk about the organization of the body. Okay, we'll start with the smallest particles, the building blocks for the human body, and then continue until we get to the organism itself. Then we'll talk about the characteristics of life, some of the processes that the bodies or living organisms have to achieve to be able to live, okay? And then we'll talk about compartmentalization of the body. Because the body is a very complex, organism, the human body is. So it's compartmentalized into like thoracic cavity, for instance, and we'll talk about that at the end, right? And then we'll also talk about homeostasis, which is maintenance of a relatively constant internal environment. You need to maintain, say, a certain temperature, which is optimal for the kinds of reactions that go on in the body. And we'll talk about the mechanisms that are required to achieve that. All right? But first we'll just talk about the subject, anatomy and physiology, what they are. Right? So anatomy is pretty much describes the physical characteristics of the organism. Right? What you can see, or the structure. And the reason we study anatomy and physiology together is that the structure pretty much determines the function, which is the physiology part of that organ or organism or body part. Right? And one of the examples I always give is your hand, which is adapted for grasping. That's why you have 3 little bones here, the phalanges. Okay? Otherwise, if you had 1 little bone here, the most you could do is this. You couldn't grasp stuff. So the structure of anything pretty much determines the function. So they are always good to study these 2 together. So when we look at anatomy, we can look at it in several ways. The first one is systemic anatomy. So when we look at different systems, say you can isolate the digestive system, you can isolate the respiratory system, and then you can determine. That's fine for us. Okay, I guess it will work now. Hopefully it will. Well, anyway, I was working in 2362 and it was working perfectly. Now 2362, not so good. Another way we can look at anatomy is regional anatomy. Okay, in a certain region, there are certain parts, and towards the end, I'll show you quadrants of the thoracic cavity showing different body parts underneath it. Okay, so regional anatomy is the study of certain areas of the body, and surface anatomy, of course, we use surface anatomy to locate deeper structures, right? Usually, sometimes when you go to the doctor's office, they could do what is called percussion. They put their hand on there and they hit the hands like this. Depending on the characteristics of the internal organs underneath, it will make a different sound, and the doctor can pick up on that. That's an example of using surface anatomy to determine what's going on in a deeper way. There's also technological ways of determining the internal structures, such as what are some of the technological ways we use to view internal structures? CAT scans in your eye, ultrasound, all those things. Okay, so surface anatomy is important because if you say wanted to see the baby growing, ultrasound is the most common one, right? You have to know where the related to the surface where the uterus is. You wouldn't be checking like here or there on the bicep. You won't see any baby in there. You have to know, what part of the body and what lies deep to that surface. Okay, so surface anatomy is important for this. All right, and then of course physiology is the study of the functions. It includes all the metabolic reactions, all the chemical reactions that occur in the body, a conversion of certain chemicals into other chemicals, like amino acids can be converted to other amino acids. Right? Glucose can be stored as glycogen. All those the functions talk about what that body part does, the actions that it does. And usually they happen via chemical reactions. All right, so that's the physiology part. All right, on Connect Plus as well, and I will normally show some of the kind of pictures because we will be dealing with cats. We don't have a cat over there when there's another one in the Pacific Northwest because we just don't have the time. So this is an actual human being, and you can actually do dissections on it by peeling off layers. You can peel off the skin, you can see the muscles, and pull off some muscles, and you can see even deeper muscles until you get to the skeleton. So, and there's an application on the Connect Plus called APR 3.0, which is anatomy and physiology. So when we get to the level, I'll talk more about it, and we can use it to study, for the lab material. Right? So that's the anatomy there. And then, so there are 6 different levels of organization, starting with the smallest chemicals, and the atoms that join up to form molecules, that join up to form organelles, and then organelles form the cell, which is the basic unit of living organism. All right, and then the cells, similar cells, join together to form tissues. All right, and then tissues are put together by a cellular matrix, the extracellular matrix that holds the tissues together. And those tissues perform a certain function, all right? And tissues combine together to form organs, right? And then what are some of the organs in the body? Like the kidney. What else? What other organs do we have? The stomach is an organ, all right? Heart. The muscle is an organ of the muscular system, all right? And things like that. And then, of course, organs make up systems. The system is made up. Colon, and so on. And then systems make up the organism. So we'll talk about each of these and kind of sort of give examples of these levels of organization. All right? I'm not sure why my pen is not working, but I'm going to try it. Great. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so the chemical levels, those are the atoms. Like for instance, the water molecule is made up of H2O, 2 molecules of hydrogen, and 1 molecule of oxygen. All right, and 1 atom of oxygen, like that. Okay, and so that makes up the molecules, and then the molecules will combine to form organelles. All right. What are some of the organelles in the cell that you did in biology? The nucleus is an organelle. What else? Mitochondria. What else? The endoplasmic reticulum. All those things come together and bounded by the plasma membrane to form a cell. All right? And then those cells, and this is just an example of a hypothetical cell, because it's showing flagella, it's also showing cilia. Usually a cell is one of the 2. It's just showing all the possible organelles a cell can have. Right? It's not any particular cell. Right? And the endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi body, and so forth. So all those organelles make up a cell. And then cells combined together, similar cells, to perform a certain function, make up the tissues. And then the tissues, like small muscle tissue and so forth, which are similar cells that make up that tissue, and they are usually bound by an extracellular matrix that kind of holds those cells together. And when we talk about growth, we also mention the extracellular matrix, because it is also involved in growth, which is one of the characteristics of life. Okay? All right, so, and then just showing you the pattern, showing you the kind of cells in there, the epithelial cells, all right? And the organ level, all right? So different tissues make up an organ, like the bladder here that's strong, the kidneys, the heart, and so forth. Right? And then this one is just, again, pictures of cadavers. I like to show them in an actual cadaver. This is a female, so you have your blood over here, uterus down here, right? And then it's probably at the back here, right? So, that's that. And then, of course, these organs join up within the system. One of the simplest systems, the urinary system, only has the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra, the one that binds the urine to calcium. Right? So that's the one that's shown over there. And then all those systems come together to form the whole organism. Right? And that whole organism, like we said, is very complex, so it's going to have to be well organized. Right? There's the urinary system right there. So the kidneys and the total organism with the respiratory system, digestive system down here, reproductive system, nervous system, including the spine, nerves, and the brain. Right? So, and we're just going to look at the different systems. Pretty much I'm going to quickly go through this because this is the information that you may have covered a little bit in Biology 101. But in ANP2, we'll cover things like the lymphatic system, the respiratory system, the digestive system in separate lectures. And we will cover them in more detail. But basically, what does the lymphatic system do? What is the function of the lymphatic system? Which system is intricately connected to the lymphatic system? Yeah, to some extent here. But I'm talking about another system that is much like the lymphatic system. Circulatory system, the blood vessels. Because what does the lymphatic system do? It collects excess fluid that collects in the tissues, right? So otherwise you get a lot of edema and swelling and so forth. Okay, so the lymphatic system is very important, and it deposits those fluids back into the circulatory system and the extracellular vein, right? And then we all know what the respiratory system does, right? Exchange of gases, oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. In fact, the body, is more motivated to get rid of oxygen, carbon dioxide than it is to actually acquire oxygen. All right. If we had a very efficient way of getting rid of carbon dioxide, we wouldn't nearly breathe as much as we do. We would just probably have one breath a minute. Because the carbon dioxide creates acid environment in the blood, because it dissolves in water, forms carbonic acid. All right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually cover the respiratory system. So, digestive, of course, we know that breaking down food, absorbing, and then muscular system for movement, skeletal system support, and protection, like the skull protects the brain, and of course, the integumentary system involves skin, is the covering of the body, and things like nails are part of the integumentary system, hair, and all that. But skin is the largest organ in the body, and it's part of the integumentary system. Right? And then so we'll skip through this real quick. These are just pictures to show you each of the systems. The lymphatic, of course, part of the lymphatic is the thymus and the spleen. Lymphatic system. And then we get the respiratory system, digestive. Of course, the integumentary, because it's the cover. The integumentary. And the skin is the major organ here, of course, the skin bone, which we will be doing in the lab, the vascular system, and then some more systems. All these systems make up the human being. That's why you need to be very well organized. Otherwise, it will be problematic and you won't be able to function properly. So the nervous system, of course, is the wiring and it communicates messages throughout the rest of the body, and it also gathers information from the outside and from the inside, so that you are able to maintain homeostasis, which is kind of maintaining the environment of the body relatively constant, because it doesn't stay flatlined, it fluctuates around the normal levels. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we do the respiratory system. When we do the homeostatic mechanisms in a little bit. Then cardiovascular, of course, the one we talked about, circulatory system, and then for reproduction, right? Which is one of the characteristics of life. You have to be able to reproduce, otherwise organisms become extinct. So, then of course, urinary system gets rid of metabolic waste. Again, we will quickly go through this, and then we will really talk about the characteristics of life in homeostasis. Right? So that's the endocrine system. In fact, we'll do the endocrine system in the part 2 from this term 2. We will do it in pain, which is also like the nervous system, which controls like metabolic activities, hormones. Right? And then cardiovascular, circulatory, and then so that's it. Now we talk about the characteristics of life. What do organisms have to achieve in order to successfully have? So organization. The body has to have certain specific parts that are related in a specific way to other organs, so that they work together as a whole. Okay. Can you imagine some of the problems that would happen if the body wasn't organized? What do you think would happen if the body was not organized? When you think, for instance, about the nervous system, what does the nervous system do? It conducts messages via electrical currents in the body. Imagine if you just dump all the wires in there, which are the nerves in this case, and they're not well organized. Do you think you will be cross-contaminating all over the place and exciting stuff? It's like what I was saying in the morning. If you're building a house, and when the electricians come and they're laying down the wiring of the house, which is like the nervous system, if they just do it haphazardly, you will go into the living room, switch on a light, and it turns on in the bathroom. No good, right? So organization is very important. You need that, all right? In the exam, these are some of the questions I asked about. Can you tell me about the characteristics of life? You kind of explain it in terms of why does the body go to the, or organisms for that matter, go to the length of doing all this? Why is it necessary? All right? And of course, metabolism is important, okay? Because, for instance, it can convert certain nutrients into other nutrients that you require more of, right? And it's also not everything that your body needs that you're able to take in. So it's very important to have metabolic reactions in the body that can, change certain nutrients into the ones that you most need. All right. So those are the chemical reactions that will involve changing of the physical characteristics of the particles in the body, or combining them to form more complex molecules. Right? Like protein is made up of amino acids. Right? So, in responsiveness, an organ has to be able to respond. Okay. For instance, let's say it's a hot day, like it's been for several days. You get hot. When you get hot, what happens? You start to sweat. That's an example of responding. If, for instance, you were getting hot and your body is not able to respond, then your temperature keeps going up and up and up, and then eventually it will become too much for you. Okay? So you have to be able to respond. Okay? So you are constantly adjusting your internal environment. And physically, you can adjust your external environment by, say, moving from the sun to the shade. Okay? So that's all those things are involving being responsiveness. And in the morning, I was talking about people who always live in flooded areas. And those people, they keep coming back. It floods every single year, and they come back. They're not being responsive. Okay? You see, otherwise they would move somewhere else where it doesn't flood. But all those people are so resilient, and they always come back. So being responsive helps the survival of the organism. Growth includes, I wish I could write it on here, but I can't. It includes three things. For some reason, this is not working for us. So growth includes what? Increase in cell size, which is what's so important. Okay, because if I were to ask you about definition of growth, I would expect you to mention both all these 3 points. Increase in cell number. Well, that is growth. And remember, when I was talking about tissues, what did I talk about? What do tissues have apart from the cellular cells? What did I say tissues have? What's that? Yeah, what surrounds them, which we call extracellular material, or the extracellular matrix. All right. So increase in extra, which means outside, cellular matrix. So if I were to ask about the definition of growth, or if I was to say a list of all the characteristics of life and explain them and define them, when you talk about growth, you need to mention those 3 things. All those 3 things include growth. All right. And also development. Development entails, changing in life stages, right, over time. For instance, after conception, you become an embryo. First off, start as a zygote, a 2-cell zygote, and then you become an embryo, then you become a fetus, then you're born, then you are a baby, child, then you become adolescents. All those stages, different changes that occur over time to an organism and development. And it includes growth as well, right? It includes all those processes too. The changes that occur over time to an organism, right? And then, of course, the last one is reproduction. Organisms, they have to be able to reproduce, or else they become extinct. Right? So you've got to be able to reproduce. Right now, the most populous country in the world, China, they wanted to have baby boys. So they killed. That's not a nice way to use it. They kind of sort of get rid of the girls and so forth. So what's happening right now is that they're going to end up, that's the best way to kill your race if you're going to do that. Because the sexes are supposed to be equal in number, roughly 50% boys, 50% girls, right? So these guys are messing up that ratio when you have a lot of boys, and eventually those boys are not going to have mates to marry. That's why they have shows where the guys are really vying for the little girls they are. Because everybody wants to have a boy. I mean, if everybody has a boy, then you can't reproduce. You see what I'm saying? And soon enough, you have to marry out. Then you're diluting your race and you're wiping yourself out. You see? So, may I call it natural selection? Because eventually they would realize that if they don't mess with those ratios, then they can do this. But if they keep messing with that ratio, eventually they'll have to marry out and then they'll dilute their race. Soon it will be some other hybrid of this one before. Okay? Maybe they'll wake up on this. Anyway, there's too many of them, so they better do that. So that they don't produce too much. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that when you mess with all these nature things, the characteristics of life are important for your survival of the species. So now we talk about homeostasis, which is the maintenance of a relatively constant internal environment. You should note the word relative here, because relative means that you're not flatlining at the set point. You are actually, and there's an eraser here. You are fluctuating along the set point, like on that graph right there, like this. Let's say this was temperature, which is 37 degrees C. All right, your temperature, will fluctuate along this normal range. So this is the normal range, okay? And homeostatic mechanisms are only kick in if your temperature goes here or your temperature goes there. If your temperature goes here, what happens? What happens if your temperature goes here? Or whatever that variable is. What happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. Because it's fluctuating in a normal range. Your temperature is not going to be constant like at 37 degrees C. It's going to fluctuate around there. And there's a normal range that the body has. So only when the variable goes outside of the normal range are homeostatic mechanisms initiated. Okay? So that's why it's relatively constant internal environment. If I ask you to define homeostasis in the exam and you say homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment, that's partially correct. Probably give you a point for that. Because it doesn't maintain constantly, it will fluctuate. All those variables, anything that can change value or magnitude in the data set, right? And they're maintained within a normal range. And the set point will be the reference point about which that variable will fluctuate within the normal range. Right? So homeostatic mechanism only kick in when you go outside of the normal range. Okay, so that's important thing to notice. Because what do you think would happen? Let's say the body strictly maintains the temperature or whatever the variable you're looking at exactly 37 degrees Celsius. What do you think could be problematic about that?
Your body would keep changing speed outside and it's going to fluctuate.
Well, yeah, that's right. It will fluctuate. But then the body is going to strictly maintain it at 37. What do you think eventually would happen if it was going to be strictly maintained at 37 degrees C? Don't you think you would run out of energy at some point? Because you will be cranking the whole time just to maintain it at 37 degrees C. It's more energetically demanding to maintain the temperature at exact set point than it is over a range. You see what I'm saying? The body is doing a million things and a half right now as we are sitting right now. Okay? And the other time I was reading an article that said if you convert the brain, the human brain, into a computer, it would perform a million times better than the supercomputer there is in terms of the number of things it can do per second. So that's how complex the human body is, right? Okay? It's because it's wise. It conserves energy. It doesn't bother to maintain temperature at an exact set point. It's more energetically demanding to do that than to maintain it in a range, right? So anything the body does and anything the way it looks is not by accident. There's a specific reason why. See, that's why the body is successful. In fact, it's the most amazing entity there is in the whole world. All right. So homeostasis it is maintained, of course, by negative feedback mechanisms. Mostly, there's two types of homeostatic mechanisms: negative feedback, which will oppose the initial change. All right. So if your temperature goes up, negative homeostatic mechanisms will cause your temperature to go down by sweating. If your temperature goes down, negative homeostatic mechanisms will kick in and you start to shiver. Muscles produce a lot of heat because they don't use up all the energy in ATP and they release it as heat, and then shivering, and then you warm up. Right? Positive feedback mechanisms, on the other hand, usually are harmful and will cause that variable to continue to worsen. It will exacerbate the initial change. So if your temperature goes up, it will continue to go up until you blow up or whatever. If your temperature goes down, it continues to go down until you freeze. So there's only a few instances when positive feedback mechanisms are useful, such as childbirth. Okay, when the baby has reached a certain size, it will distend the uterus by a certain amount of pressure that the body recognizes as fully grown fetus, and then oxytocin is released, and the more oxytocin is released, more and more oxytocin is released until contraction strong enough to push the baby out. So that's a positive feedback mechanism. Also, another one positive feedback mechanism is blood clotting. Okay? When the platelets come across maybe collagen or where there's damage, they become sticky, and when one platelet becomes sticky, it makes more platelets become sticky. So that's a positive feedback mechanism, and then until you form a clot, and then it stops. Okay. But negative feedback is what maintains homeostasis. All right. So because it opposes the initial change. The change here is also called a stimulus. Change and stimulus are the same thing. Okay. A change or a stimulus is what the receptors can pick up as a difference from the initial value of whatever that value is. Receptors, they're specialized receptors that pick up different kinds of stimuli or changes. Like photoreceptors in the eye, you are sensitive to different light. Okay, and then chemoreceptors, such as the ones in the blood vessels, are sensitive to the concentration of different chemicals in the blood. All right, and then we'll talk a bit about blood pressure. We have baroreceptors that measure the pressure, the blood pressure in the vessels. Okay, and negative feedback mechanisms are used for homeostasis. Positive feedback enhances the initial change, and therefore it's shown harmful. Right? So positive feedback mechanisms upregulate or exacerbate the initial change, and that is moving away from the normal. Because if it's going down and it keeps going down, no good. If it's going up and it keeps going up, no good. Okay? So positive feedback is usually harmful. Alright? So what do you need for a positive for a homeostatic mechanism? First of all, you need to be able to tell what's going on, right? Whether on the outside, the external environment, or the inside, the internal environment. And for that, you need a receptor, which we just talked about. It could be a light receptor, photoreceptor. It could be a chemoreceptor, right? Or it could be an internal receptor. We'll talk about some of these receptors in the different kinds. Right? It's sensitive to a particular stimuli change. So you need that. Then, of course, the control center would be the what? What is the control center in this case? Yeah, it does receive the signal from the receptor. But what is representative of this? What is it actually? What body part is the control center? What's the control center? Yeah, the brain. Very correct. The brain. If I could write it here, I would write it here. But the control center is the brain. Okay? And it has the set point. The brain has the values, the ideal values for each variable that occurs, like its temperature or whatever it is, right? And the body, once the receptor picks that change or that stimulus, it will transport it to the brain, to the control center, and then the brain will compare the change to the set point, all right? So that it knows if your temperature is now 40 degrees, so it will know that your temperature is gone up. So in order to set homeostatic mechanisms that will bring it down, then it will know to sweat. Okay? But it only does that after it is compared it to the set point. Alright? So, because this is the computer of the brain, of the body. So it has all the set points and to compare. So the effector, what do you think the effector does? What's the function of the effector in this case? What would it do? Exactly. Just exactly like that. Because the control center will send out information through motor nerves. This is sensory. It goes here, and then it compares it, and then it gives instructions to the effectors. You're hot, and you start to sweat, all right? So the effector would be sweat glands. That's the effector. Okay? You're cold, you start shivering, the effector would be the muscles. Alright? So those are the three things you need for a homeostatic mechanism to work. Alright? So, but it has 5 processes that have to happen in a homeostatic mechanism. Okay? And it includes those 3 parts we talked about. All right. So one of the parts is the receptor, which picks up the change from the internal or from the external environment, and then the information has to be sent to the brain, to the control center via sensory nerves. So this is a sensory function. Sensory nerves take information to the central nervous system, right? Then once the information gets there, then it will, compare that change to the set point, right? Whatever that variable is, it's a certain set point, an ideal range, right? That's why I was talking earlier on. If the control center compares the set point and finds that the change is only here, what's going to happen? Nothing happens, right? Just like we said before. That's why you need the control center to compare the change, because it doesn't just work. That's why we were saying earlier on, it's more energetically demanding if the body is going to maintain these variables constantly, Z is 37 or whatever the variable is. Because then, whenever it goes here, it does something. Whenever it goes here, it does something. It goes here. Whereas it could be doing other things, and so that's why you need a normal range. All right? So the control center will compare it, and if there needs to be action, then something is put in motion, whether to increase or decrease the variable. Okay? In a negative feedback way. If it had gone up, it will go down. If it had gone down, it will go up. So that's the negative feedback fashion. So the rest of the processes in a homeostatic mechanism include if a response is necessary. That's what I'm saying. If it is necessary. If it has gone out of the normal range. If it's within the normal range, a response is not necessary. Nothing happens. Alright? Then it will give the specific instructions to a particular effector to do the job. Alright? So the effector will then produce the final response that is required, whether it be sweat glands, whether it be the muscles, or whether it be another gland that releases a certain hormone or whatever. So, gotta know the 5 processes of the homeostatic mechanism, gotta know the 6 characteristics of life, and gotta know the 3 components that must be present for a homeostatic mechanism to work. Alright? And then, of course, the levels of organization of organisms, right? So, this is a scenario that I'm going to give you about the homeostatic mechanism. Okay, we're going to use blood pressure as an example, right? So, as I was saying earlier on, strategically placed in the major arteries are baroreceptors, pressure receptors, and also chemoreceptors for chemical concentrations, right? So, these baroreceptors will gauge blood pressure, right? And then, so that's the receptors here, gauge the blood pressure. And then it goes to the control center. In this case, it will go to the medulla oblongata, which is the part that is the last part of the brain that is continuous with the spinal cord. So the medulla oblongata controls things like heart rate, thirst, things like that, you know that. Because thirst has to do with what? That is involved in the cardiovascular system. If you're drinking fluids, it affects your level of what? Your blood, right? And the amount of blood in your blood vessels determines your blood pressure. Okay? So sometimes it could be that your blood pressure is going down and you need to take in fluids. You need to take in more fluids to bring your blood up a little bit so your pressure goes up. Because if your pressure is too low, that means your body cannot pump blood to all the parts of your body and to deliver nutrients and oxygen. So the blood pressure also is homeostatically maintained at about 120 over 70. Right? So that information sends to the medulla oblongata, which compares it to what the set point is. So let's say in this instance, blood pressure has gone down. Okay? Blood pressure has gone down. Okay? What message is going to be sent to the effector, the heart in this case? What's going to happen to your heart rate? It's going to increase. If your blood pressure goes down low, your heart rate goes up. Okay? That's why if you, let's say you've been shot, if you're losing blood, your heart is a bit faster, trying to pump more blood. You see, because less blood is coming back to the heart, and your blood pressure is going down, it's going down. So in vain, your heart will try to beat faster, okay? Until you have a medical intervention like a transfusion and you stop the bleeding, then you won't be able to correct it, because what will happen is positive feedback mechanisms will cause the blood pressure to continue to go down. Right? And we'll talk about it with an example that I'll show later. Okay, so and if blood pressure has gone up, then heart rate will go down, so that less blood is pumped into the system, because pretty much blood pressure is the amount of fluid in the pipes. The more fluid you have in the pipes, which are the blood vessels in this case, the higher the pressure. The less fluid you have, the lower the pressure. All right? That's why you shouldn't take a lot of salt, because if you take a lot of salt, it has to be diluted by retaining more fluid. And then your blood volume goes up, and blood pressure goes up. And then, so when you get older, especially if you're hypertensive, if you have tendencies for hypertensive, you have to take less salt. Right? And then, of course, the effect is high. So that's just an example of the homeostatic mechanism using blood pressure. And this shows the same concept. If blood pressure increases, okay, heart rate will go down. Or you can even cause diuresis too. Okay, that's what. Because all these systems, remember, all these systems are organized and they're working together. Okay. In this case, we're just talking about the heart, but if your blood pressure goes up, you could also cause diuresis, loss of fluids, by urinating. You urinate more. So then that decreases the blood pressure because the blood volume goes down. So all these things, can you imagine, are happening all at the same time. And if it's correcting a change, certain systems are doing certain things and other systems are doing certain things to maintain that normal range. So you can begin to see how complex, the mechanisms in the body are, because they're all happening simultaneously at the same time. That's why when I was talking about the brain, if you make it into a computer, it can perform many functions than the supercomputer per second. Because right now you're doing a million things right now as you see. Okay, and everything is working. Right? Right. So another thing I wanted to point out is that if you're exercising, you set up a new normal range. Remember, when you're exercising, your heart starts to beat faster, okay? And your heart rate goes up, you're pumping more blood, because your muscles are requiring more oxygen when you're jogging or whatever cardiovascular activity you're doing. All right? So in that case, you set up a new higher normal, so that if, like, you are over-exerting yourself, maybe you want to lose weight too much, and your blood pressure goes up here, then the homeostatic mechanism will have to kick in to bring it back into this new normal range. Okay? So when you rest, after the exercise, it comes back down to the normal range. Right? This is a new normal when you're exercising. So that's what happens to whenever you need to maintain your high blood pressure. And this is an example of a positive feedback mechanism, such as when you're short and no corrective action is taken, you bleed out, and you continue to lose blood pressure. Right? And this is an example where you have like a positive feedback action, where when your blood pressure is going down, it means less blood is going to your heart. All right? It means your heart is able to pump less blood back into the system, and then blood pressure goes down even lower. So it kind of works on itself and it exacerbates itself in a positive feedback fashion. All right? So blood flow to cardiac muscles is low. So that means the cardiac muscles themselves are not getting the oxygen they need in order to pump. So the heart pumps weaker and weaker and weaker too. And then you keep on losing your blood pressure. That's a positive feedback mechanism, you see. All right? So in an example, let's say I ask you to explain the positive feedback mechanisms that are occurring when your blood pressure is going low. This is what I would need you to say. All right? You would say, one, less blood goes back to the heart. Okay? If less blood goes back to the heart, in terms of filling the chambers, the heart will only pump whatever little blood there is. So that means less blood goes back into the system, pressure goes low. Number two, less blood actually goes into the heart muscle. Because the coronary arteries take oxygenated blood to the heart muscle itself. If the heart muscle is not getting oxygenated blood, it doesn't have the oxygen it needs to pump. So it's going to pump quicker, and then when it pumps quicker, blood pressure goes down. Okay. So that's one of the things I'm going to do, is ask you questions that don't just ask you to recall the information, but ask you to synthesize and answer using that, like the positive feedback mechanisms. That okay? In fact, that's a good exam question I'm going to ask it. Right? Okay, when blood pressure is going low, okay, what causes this to keep going down? And this is a little cartoon about positive and negative feedback. This one is not working for some reason.
During the menstrual cycle, before ovulation, small amounts of estrogen are secreted from the ovary. Estrogen stimulates the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone also stimulates release of luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. Luteinizing hormone, in turn, causes release of additional estrogen from the ovary. The levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone and luteinizing hormone increase in the blood due to this positive feedback effect. After ovulation, the corpus luteum is formed in the ovary and begins to secrete progesterone in response to luteinizing hormone. Progesterone inhibits the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. Blood levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone and luteinizing hormone decrease because of this negative feedback effect.
Okay, so when we do the endocrine system, we're going to cover some of these hormones and some of these organs, the pituitary and the hypothalamus especially, because the hypothalamus is a lot of organs that control the anterior and posterior pituitary. All right? Okay, very good. Now we're just going to talk about the reference position, which is the anatomical position. All the directional terms that we're going to talk about, whether it is superior, inferior, proximal, distal, is relative to the anatomical position, which is this, just like what I'm doing right now. Your arms to your side, palms facing forward, head upright, facing forward, your feet slightly apart. That's the anatomical position. And then all the other positions are based on the anatomical positions. Alright? So if I ask you to define the anatomical position, which I probably will in the exam, this is what you would say. Arms towards the side, palms facing forward. Okay, head erect and standing upright. Facing forward. Feet slightly apart. Alright? So that's the anatomical position. So if you're lying supine, you're lying facing up. Right? Okay. So if the doctor is going to do surgery on your abdomen or something, they might say, okay, place the patient in a supine position on the operating bed, so we can do our job. So if you do know what supine is, so you need to know these body positions, and then later on I'll show you a quadrant which separates the thorax, and the abdomen into portions, and that have certain organs underneath those parts, kind of like using setups on anatomy to determine what's deep. And then we'll talk about the significance of knowing what's in those quadrants. Right? And then prone is lying face down. Okay. So if you're going to do something, maybe spine surgery or something like that, put the patient in the prone position on the operating bed. Do that so you can operate. And usually you have to isolate whatever part is being operated, because that's going to be cleaned up, everything else is going to be covered. So if you didn't know where that organ is or whatever you're operating on, then you won't know where to clean it, you won't know what to isolate. So it's important to know that in your head. So there's an anatomical position. If you are describing it in an exam situation, just imagine this position and describe that. Using, of course, the terms that we use. And then I'm going to give you those terms. Supine position, prone position, face down. Right? And these are the terms that I'm talking about. Okay, so the longitudinal plane here from the midline separates it into left and right. And we're going to talk about that plane in a little bit, which is the sagittal plane. Okay, it's based on the sagittal suture that runs across like that. Right? And we'll see that when we do the skeletal system. Okay. So, and then, of course, superior and inferior. Like here, my eyes are superior to my nose. When you're describing terms, especially in the exam and so forth, you're not going to say, my eyes are on top of your nose. Okay? You're going to say, my eyes are superior to my nose, or your mouth is inferior to your nose. In that way. That's how, those are the terms I'm going to expect you to use. Oh, it's not working. But cephalic means of the head. It's anything to do with the head is cephalic. All right? And then anterior is to the front, posterior to the back. Okay? That's in reference to a bipedal animal. But if you're talking about a quadrupedal animal, like a cat or a dog, okay, ventral, which is underneath, is what is anterior in the upright animal. And then dorsal, dorsum means back in Latin. It means back. So dorsal is the back, okay, and is posterior in a bipedal, right? So ventral is anterior, dorsal is back. Okay. So sometimes I can say, okay, compare the anatomical position of the cat and the human being, right? What are the equivalents, right? Like ventral in a cat would be equivalent to anterior in the human being, right? This is the front. And dorsal would be equivalent to the posterior in the human being, right? So if I could write it down here, write it down. Usually I post the marked or annotated lecture on my heritage as well, so you can see the markup. I will use the one I used in the morning because it was working in the morning, and then I'll just post that on your site. And then distal and proximal. Distal is in relation to the head, okay, and if something is further from the head than another body part, then you'd say, for instance, my hand is distal to my elbow, because it's much further from the head. All right. My shoulder is proximal compared to the elbow. Okay. Proximal is closer to the head. Distal, like the name says, is further away. Right. And then lateral. Anything that's lateral is from the midline going out. If it's going outside of the midline, it's lateral. Okay. If it's going towards the midline, it's medial. Right. And superficial and deep. Something superficial is almost on the surface. If it's deep, like we were saying, we use surface anatomy to distinguish the deeper structures, so we know what is deep into the surface. Right. So those are the terms: deep and superficial. Superficial is closer to the exterior. So I'll show you a series of, and even here it shows the equivalent for a bipedal and quadrupedal. Bipedal, right? Those terms. And anything that's caudal, okay, means not caudal, is towards the tail end. Like in a quadrupedal animal. So the tail end is the caudal end. Right? Okay, so then the superior and inferior, and we talked about the usage of those terms in terms of describing the body parts. Okay. And the anterior, you could say, the chest is in front of the back, but you could also say the chest is anterior to the back. Okay. So that's what I would appreciate if you say whenever you are answering using this terminology in these terms in the exams. Okay. If you say something's on top of something, it's okay, I will take it, but get into the habit of using the actual terminologies that refers to the position. Right. and then of course proximal and distal going towards the center, lateral off center towards the sides. Alright, deep, of course going into deeper into the internal structures and superficial towards the outside. And this is just a good summary of all those terms, right? But sometimes you could visualize those terms better if you're looking at the diagram than the description. You know, that's why I got all those diagrams in there, so you could use them to visualize it. Sometimes if you're in an exam, you can visualize the position of the body and you can describe it better than if you just looked at the words that describes the position. Right? There you go. And some of this, you know, is going to help us more with the anatomy in the lab when we're doing bone. For instance, like this is the carpal region, right? Where you have the carpals for the wrist, this is the tarsal region, and so forth. For the tarsals, for the foot, which are the small bones, in those areas, and so forth. It's a funny to do with the head. So you can kind of look at this, and it will help you with some of those terms we talked about, like the dorsal, which is the back, and then the anterior, and so forth. Right? So this is what I was talking about in terms of the quadrants that show, you know. So if I was to say isolate the right iliac region for surgery, what do you think we might be working on? Which is this. What do you see in the right iliac region? What kind of surgery do you think happens? It's a common surgery, actually. Cancer is not very common, but you're on the right track because at least you saw the colon, which is good. What else do you see right underneath the colon? What do you see?
Oh,
exactly. If appendicitis is kind of like a common thing, you know, people get inflammation of the appendix and it's removed. So the doctor would say, okay, can you isolate and clean up the right iliac region? And if you didn't know what that was, you know, so you need to know that. And you know, the iliac region is named after the ilium, which is part of the pelvis. Right? And we'll be doing that in a short while when we get into the lab, because that's the pelvic girdle, which is made of the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Right? So, and if you can press here, you can feel your iliac bone. Part of the ilium. So, and then hypogastric is under the stomach. There's going to be the blood and some of the small intestine in there. If you're on the right side, this is the ascending aorta. I can't write on this thing. Okay? But sometimes it works here. So that is the okay, see here. That's the ascending aorta. And if you, does it even come out here? Oh, it does. But it came out on that side. Okay. Anyway, that's okay, no problem. And then this is the transverse colon, and then the descending colon. So it's on the left. And the lumbar region is named after the lumbar vertebrae, which is the lower back. And then, of course, the umbilical region, because of the umbilicus, is right there. Okay. And then the epigastric is about the stomach. The stomach is now the epigastric region. And the right hypochondrial region, mostly the liver, and on the other side is the stomach. In the pit of the colon, too. Transverse colon, that is. Right. The colon is ascending, transverse, and descending. Go towards the right hand and the left hand. Alright, so I want you to know the organs that are in each of these quadrants. Okay. As if you're playing exercise. You could play a game with your buddy or something and you know, play X's and O's by placing the organ that's in that quadrant. Just something fun to do that you know, will actually help you to learn it. You know, you can do that. So I want you to know what's in those quadrants. All right. So now we talk about the body planes. All right. Sagittal plane, it goes along the sagittal suture and divides the body into left and right. Divides the body into left and right. So it's along the normal axis of the body. Transverse divides the body into superior and inferior. Again, we're using those terms that we did. And then, of course, frontal will divide, or sometimes called coronal, because of the coronal suture that separates the frontal bone from the parietal bones. So the corona will divide into anterior and posterior, or front and back, if you like. All right? So those are the planes. Be able to describe those planes, and we'll show them in picture form so that it will help you to visualize. If the plane is not in the center, it's just called a sagittal plane. It's off center. And then if it's in the center, it's called mid-sagittal plane. All right? And then, of course, transverse across superior and inferior, coronal, for frontal plane, divide it into front and back, or anterior and posterior. And then long organs have a longitudinal axis along the long side of the organ, and so forth. And then, of course, transverse across. And then, of course, oblique is at an angle. It's a transverse section at an angle. So, oblique section. Right? And then we'll show you in picture form so you can kind of visualize it. All right? So, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is the body cavities. Remember, in the morning I was talking about how when you build a house, you can have a 4,000 square feet of house. If it's all one room, is it any good? No. The house is divided into certain rooms, like the kitchen where you cook, the dining where you eat, the bedroom where you sleep. The same thing with the body. It's divided into the thoracic cavity where you do the respiratory functions, the abdominal cavity where you do the digestive functions. And the membranes that demarcate those cavities are serous membranes, spelled as serous membranes. All right? And they demarcate body cavities that do not extend to the outside. Then we have mucous membranes that will line on systems that open to the outside. What are such systems that open to the outside? Mouth and anus is part of the digestive system. So it's lined by mucous membrane because it opens to the outside. The mouth opens to the outside and the anus opens to the outside. In fact, when you eat something, before you absorb it, it's not internalized. You know that, right? If you eat something just because it's inside of you, it's not in you. Because the digestive system is a pipe that starts here, ends there. It's just inside of you, but it's really not inside. Things are internalized once you absorb them. Then they're inside. But once you swallow something, especially at the beginning of digestion, when you just swallow something, it's not in you yet. It might look like it's in you, but not yet. Okay? So the thoracic cavity, of course, is surrounded by the ribs and the diaphragm, right? And the membranes that do that are called pleura. The serous membranes that do that, pleura. Okay? And then, of course, the abdominal cavity is demarcated by those serous membranes, and they are called peritoneum. And I'll show you pictures later on. Okay? And then the pelvic cavity is also bounded by peritoneum, serous membranes, and it's down here. Sometimes they call it one thing the abdominal pelvic regions. This is really having all those digestive, the reproductive parts, and then the abdominal cavity would have the digestive parts. All right? And then those are the body cavities right there. Okay. And then, so all these organs are bounded by two membranes. One that is intimately in connection with the soft internal organ, which are called viscera. So that's the visceral layer, membrane. And then the one that is demarcating the body cavity is the parietal layer. Between the parietal layer and the visceral layer is serous fluid. So the serous fluid is for what? What is the serous fluid for? Your heart is beating like this. Your lungs are also inflating and deflating. If there wasn't that lubricant, what would happen? You'd have too much friction. You see? So that serous fluid helps to reduce the friction when those organs are inflating and deflating, or when the heart is beating. So an example would be a balloon. If you fill it with water and you put your fist in there, your fist will be the organ. So this will be the visceral layer in close contact with your fist, or the organ in this case, and this will be the cavity full of fluid which lubricates, and then of course parietal layer on the outside, right? And the purpose is to secrete the serous fluid which will lubricate, especially the heart and the lungs. Yeah. Inflating, deflating, increasing size. So you need that. In fact, if it is inflamed, this like the pericardial cavity or the pericardial layers, the visceral and are inflamed, you have problems. You could get fluid accumulating in there, and then it starts to literally to suffocate the heart so that the heart doesn't beat properly, and you can have problems. So those membranes, very important, surrounds the heart, of course, the pericardium to do with the heart, and then the pleura, of course, like I said, to do with the lungs. Right? So there's the pericardium, and then with the two layers, the visceral layer, which is an intimate link connection with the heart, and then the parietal layer on the outside, with serous fluid in the middle. The pleura for the lungs, and then the peritoneum for the small intestine and large intestine and so forth. All those organs are enclosed in there, including including the reproductive parts. And then there's also mesentery. You know the small intestine, you know how long it is, and it looks like it's all dumped in your gut, in your abdomen, but it's arranged into certain ways by mesentery. It's very important for that. Because imagine if they kick up on each other and your intestines are blocked, you get major problems, right? So the mesentery will help to organize in some fashion, because everything is got to be organized, right? Those small intestine, it's very long. So the mesentery is important for that. And then behind the peritoneum are organs like the kidneys and so forth that are called retroperitoneum because they're behind the peritoneum. Okay? Like all these organs. Retroperitoneum, just be able to describe the retroperitoneum organs and the mesentery, what the function of it is, and of course the serous membranes, the two kinds, the visceral and the parietal layer, and what they're called in each of the systems, the cardiovascular system in the heart, and the respiratory system in the lungs, and also the digestive. Alright, so and then that's just a picture showing you the mesentery, showing you the peritoneum and the cavity and the solid. Alright, and that's about it. So thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. We'll see you in a bit in the lab. Okay. All right. So the left side.